Ramadan 2020 was an unusual month for Muslims. With lockdown in effect and no trips to the mosque, the Ramadan spirit for some Canadian Muslims was pretty low. Mosques in the Greater Toronto Area, including Toronto, the City of Toronto, Markham, Brampton, Milton, as well as other major cities across Canada, Ottawa, others were given the permission to broadcast the Adhan for one of the five daily prayers. More specifically, the call to prayer for Maghrib, or the evening prayer at sundown, was broadcasted for less than 3 minutes daily during the month of Ramadan. However, the backlash that this community experienced was shocking. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you. I am your host, Taha Ghayur, at the Canada Today show at the Muslim Network TV. Today we are delighted to have three wonderful guests with us who are going to talk to us about the Adhan controversy. What is the big deal? So we'll start off with our first guest today, Rabia Habib. She is the founder of Canadian Association of Muslims with Disabilities and the executive director of Muslim Council of Peel, also the president of Dean Support Services. Rabia Habib has been serving on many boards and committees that deal with women's issues, ethno-racial issues, and people with disabilities, and support groups along with Human Rights Commission. Rabia has been recognized for her leadership and community contributions and has received the Queen Elizabeth and the second Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012. Welcome, Sister Rabia, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, why don't we start off by talking about the Adhan itself, this word that probably many Canadians heard for the first time ever about a month ago, beginning of Ramadan. What is Adhan all about, and why is it so important in the lives of Muslims? If you can share some thoughts and insights, that would be appreciated.
Essentially, the Adhan is a call to prayer. It is that sort of reminder, when the clock strikes a certain hour at certain times of the day, to remind Muslims that it's time to pray. It's time to take a break. It's time to reflect. It's time to turn to our Creator, bow and prostrate and praise God Almighty, and just take that break to express our gratitude and pray for mercy and pray for whatever support and guidance and healing and peace and justice we are seeking in the world. So the Adhan plays a very critical role within our places of worship because that's where it takes place. In Muslim majority societies, it's called aloud, so everybody pauses, hears it, while they're running, driving, biking, whatever they are in their homes, outside their homes. They will hear it in their neighborhoods, reminding them to come to the mosque or to take a break and pray in their homes or in their places of work. Within our local context here, within Mississauga, Brampton, within Peel region, the Adhan is essentially heard within non-Muslim, within not Muslim majority countries. It's essentially heard within our places and spaces of worship. So wherever we are going to congregate to pray, that's where it's heard. That's where it's called aloud, bringing people together to come and pray in a congregation.
Okay, well, we witnessed some voices of hate protesting the idea of the public Adhan loud and clear in the aftermath of the city of Mississauga passing a motion to allow Adhan to be broadcasted in public during the month of Ramadan. And you, being the executive director of Muslim Council of Peel, were instrumental in introducing the idea to the mayor of Mississauga, Mayor Bonnie Crombie. So please share with us what actually transpired and how did it all happen and why did it become such a big deal that we had such a great backlash, sadly, in the aftermath.
So there were some informal inquiries to the mayor's office by some of our member organizations, and essentially the mayor's office in those informal dialogues suggested that something like this could not be done due to the noise bylaw, due to the sound decimals, yada, yada, yada. So we, having experienced so much Islamophobia in the region in the past around religious accommodation, and particularly religious accommodation when it pertains to Muslims, we kind of took a deep breath. We paused. We said, okay, let's see, we need to pick our battles. So we didn't make a formal request right away. Once we started to see that our neighboring cities and countries around the world and cities in the GTA like Markham, like Milton, like Toronto were permitting the call to prayer as a symbolic gesture during this pandemic, during the emergency measures, to provide some spiritual uplifting and sense of comfort to people who have invested, so much into building these places of worship and feel so socially isolated as a result of the emergency measures, not being able to go and worship. Their morale is so low, their spirit is so low. That there was a recognition that it was important to lift that up, and by making this exemption to noise bylaws, etc., for Ramadan was a really important gesture to ensure that everybody feels included, everybody feels that they belong in their local communities. And so once we start to see that the GTA was indeed coming on board with this idea, we felt compelled, especially when Brampton came on board, we felt compelled to formally make that request to the city of Mississauga, because we're one of the largest demographic communities of Muslims in all of Canada, in fact. So given that number, we made a formal request, and that formal request was embraced wholeheartedly and championed initially. And then suddenly, as soon as that was publicly announced, there was this tremendous, tremendous backlash rooted in deep, deep, deep Islamophobia that exists in this region.
So was there any opposition at the city council level where, and were there any people who are not really fully on board? Because that's where you start seeing some people who, of course, were not very happy with the idea of Athan being broadcasted. You start seeing them, really sort of approaching various and rallying behind perhaps some of the counselors, and there was a whole bunch of sort of advocacy groups forming that, resulted in a lot of noise that was really not necessary. So did you experience any of that yourself?
Well, initially everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and then they started to backpedal and wanted to renegotiate and revisit the decision, and if not, even retract the decision. And that was simply pandering to certain stakeholder groups that were driven by Islamophobia, racism, discrimination, and just tried to hijack the conversation that was, conducted in so much good faith of help and healing and well-being of all citizens, and people recognizing that faith plays an important part in our lives, and that Ramadan is a very important part in the lives of practicing Muslims, and that call to prayer would provide them so much solace, so much peace at this very difficult time when they could not come together, even as families and as communities, when there was so much social distancing and isolation happening, that this was a good thing. The agenda got hijacked, the conversation got hijacked, and certain individuals felt compelled to retract their support and start the conversation all over again.
Okay. Let me bring in our next guest, Amira Al-Ghawabi, who is a leading journalist and a human rights advocate, along with appearances on Canadian and international news networks. Amira has written and produced stories and commentary for CBC Radio, the Ottawa Citizen, Maclean's, The Walrus, the Literary Review of Canada, and the Globe and Mail. She is currently a contributing columnist for the Toronto Star. Thank you, Amira, for joining us on this show. I think you're muted.
Yes. Thank you so much, Taha, for letting me in on this wonderful conversation, and congratulations as well for the launch of this this channel. It's a wonderful opportunity to share Canadian Muslim stories and experiences. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you, and we look forward to having you more often on this show. So you have written a beautiful article on this topic, and I think you were one of the first people who wrote something that was that was positive, and that acknowledged, very interesting sentiments of Canadians and Canadian Muslims. And what I wanted to ask you first was, what was it for you like? What was it like for you when you first heard the idea of Athan being broadcast in public, personally?
You know, I thought it was a beautiful gesture from our local city councils to allow, the call to prayer to provide that solace and comfort to Canadian Muslims during Ramadan, a very sacred time. We know that there had been previous accommodations for instance, Christian communities who were observing Easter earlier in April with further ringing of the church bells, etc. So, we're all experiencing this pandemic. It's very difficult time to go through, and particularly at sacred times when we're used to coming together. It was a way, as part of Canada's social fabric and communities, for that acknowledgement of our presence and a way to provide comfort. So it was a very lovely gesture, and I was really excited. I remember that several WhatsApp chats, people were debating early on, is this really a wise idea? Is this going to attract backlash? And I think the article I wrote for the Toronto Star was trying to, of course, acknowledge that there was a backlash. Sadly, whenever there's anything to do with Canadian Muslims generally in mainstream culture in our country or elsewhere, there is a backlash. But I was trying to acknowledge that there was actually a lot of positivity as well, And I think it's really important that we sometimes just take a step back, and while we need to call out hate and we need to certainly hold those who are promoting hate to account, as was done with some of the hateful posts that were shared, I also wanted to sort of send a signal to my brothers and sisters in our communities that, don't be saddened, or don't let the sort of the excitement in the moment of being able to hear the Adhan in your community, don't let that sort of be outshined, overshadowed, I should say, by this, this minority of voices that are trying to drown out our joy and our moment. Think of all the positive message. So I quoted many tweets that I saw, Facebook posts, people who are not Muslim saying, I'm really excited to hear this, or, I heard it last night. It really brought me peace, even though I'm an atheist, for instance. There were a lot of those kinds of messages. And I think it's really important for us to always sort of, yes, confront hate, but let's also focus and give more of the microphone to those who are actually expressing solidarity.
Excellent. Well, what about this argument that we heard in the midst of all this chaos and sort of barrage of Islamophobic sentiments that we heard, that church and the state need to be separate, and by you broadcasting your live Adhan, you're infringing upon my human rights, and you are pretty much forcing me to acknowledge that God is the greatest, because that's what Allahu Akbar means. What about that argument?
Right, and that was an argument that was circulating, certainly, that was being brought forward. Stephen Zhao actually wrote several articles for both Vice News as well as for the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, where I'm a board member, looking at the sort of the backlash and where it was stemming from. And it's interesting because some of the communities that were agitating the most, Stephen in his articles points out that maybe this is coming out of a place of imported conflict, whether it was groups aligned with certain more extremist movements, say in other countries, and not to, of course, malign entire community groups. You never want to do that, but to say, there was much more that met the eye when it came to the type of efforts that were being made and the criticisms that were coming at us, and particularly this idea that the state is neutral. And of course, that's a very dangerous and unfair way to look at how Canada provides accommodations. The Ontario Human Rights Commission talks about something called systemic faithism. And that is when you look at our institutions that are actually giving privilege to, for instance, the Christian faith, where, we don't even think twice if we hear church bells ringing. So why should we think twice about hearing, for instance, the Athan or seeing, for instance, a different religious communities being celebrated and having, bylaws amended to, for example, allow for public gatherings to celebrate different festivals within ethnic religious communities. This is done all the time. Sadly, it is when it's Muslim communities that are asking for similar accommodations as other community groups, that's all of a sudden when, under the guise of separation of church and state, it's really Islamophobia that is at play. And if you look at some of these communities in which some of this is emerging, again, it can be drawn to perhaps some conflicts and tensions that may have more to do with where people come from, and sort of that imported conflict, imported trauma that they may have, which I just want to say really underscores that need for Canadian Muslim communities to keep, building on inter-community, interfaith dialogue with all sorts of religious, faith, and ethnic communities. Really, we need to continue to build relationships and dialogue. I think that's the only way forward.
Thanks for sharing those insights. I want to bring in one of our last guests, but not least, Imam Hamid Salimi. He is the Imam of the Khadija Center. He's an active community developer, a teacher, a spiritual leader. Imam Salimi is also a professor of Islamic Studies for the Canadian Center for Deen Studies, as well as at a university in Indonesia. In addition to his ijazas and 2 master's degrees from Morocco, he holds a PhD in Islamic law from the UK. Welcome to Canada Today show, Imam Hamid Salimi.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me, and congratulations for starting this network, and we wish you all the best, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you
to the other guests.
Thank you for sharing your positive and beautiful words, and we look forward to having you on our shows in the near future again. Well, Imam Salimi, we're talking about the Adhan controversy. And I wanted to start off by asking you, I know that initially you were hesitant about this idea of public broadcast of Adhan. So let me ask you, were you against the idea of doing public Adhan?
I think it was, it's not a priority. It might be symbolic. Given the rulings of Adhan and how it's conducted, it's not something occasionally you do. Either you do it and it's official, and it has a purpose. In Islam, anything we do has a purpose, has goals, has objectives. The Adhan traditionally was meant to call the people in the village or the town, and it has become a symbol. Undoubtedly is a beautiful symbol, as expressed earlier. Non-Muslims love it. It's melodious. Sometimes it can be very, nuisance, unfortunately, for the lack of better expression. When you go to some Muslim countries, in a very small area, you have 6 adhans. When I go to Indonesia, and mosques are close to each other, and they make adhan, and there is 1 hour before the adhan fajr time, and the adhan and the salat, pretty much, you could say an hour and a half of noise. I met non-Muslims that complain about it. So the adhan has been abused by us Muslims. We don't know how to do it, and we do it so much, and we sometimes, some of us don't even have a proper voice to do it, or proper rendering. But that's not the issue. The issue I was wondering is, we have priorities and we have goals, and we have some milestones to achieve. The adhan was not one of them in my priority list. However, the city thought, because they do attend in Ramadan our iftars, the most striking things, aside from the speeches and the food of Ramadan, every time we organize these iftars, whether at the federal level or Ontario, provincial, or here locally, then you have either the mayor or the premier or the ministers or MPs that would say, wow, beautiful. And many times myself, probably I would make the adhan and I receive more comments about the adhan than the speech or the lecture. It's a very powerful tool, very symbolic of Islam, very soothing for those who have no agenda. However, it reminds some people, and let me know, when my time is up, but I would say uh, this this controversy, if you want to call it, has revealed who our, I won't say the word enemies, but who are the people who are always leading this Islamophobia movement, and we know them. And this Adhan controversy showed them even well, and we knew. And we expected these voices to come out, and I knew who's gonna speak up. For instance, in Mississauga, I knew who they are, which groups, even which, quote unquote, movements they are. We know them, as the Quran says. You will know them from the way they speak and they reveal themselves. So it was expected, but it's good. The good thing, positive thing, in as much I was not really in favor for this, because I'd rather have the city focus more on zoning issues, accommodating the Muslims, on some parking issues, on timing issues, on many issues that are related to the fard, which is obligatory aspect of the religion. Adhan is mandub, which is, it's good to do it and you're rewarded. If you don't do it, it's fine. And again, the purpose of Adhan is to call the people. If you take, for instance, our center, even if I go outside and make Adhan, who's going to answer it? It's mostly commercial area, and the setup of our center, the Adhan, we do it inside, and we have people can listen through our app. They can listen to the Adhan. As a matter of fact, comes as a notification and they hear it. If we were in a Muslim setting, a village, it's nice to hear the Adhan and tradition, but the purpose is already fulfilled with different means. That's why I was hesitant, because I knew it's just gonna cause distraction, and distract us time-wise, energy-wise, instead of focusing on other things and having the opportunity to show the greatness of Islam and the beauty of Islam through iftar, through charity. We had to spend a lot of energy and time just defending this and being waste. And I'm afraid we're going to be dragged in the future into things that are usually fruitless and don't lead us to anything that is, fulfilling our mission, which is, to bring this beautiful image of Islam. That's the reason why I was hesitant. But
okay.
The positive thing, again, to sum up, is that it revealed who our as Amira said, the majority is in favor, most of them are in favor. But I'm afraid also sometimes us can abuse things. Imagine they allow us to do it 5 times a day. People will complain for sure, because we don't have it organized, and every organization would want to lead. We don't have one system that controls and times up and everything, everything for us. Okay.
Well, thank you, Imam Salimi, for sharing that, and that put me to ease, because because I thought maybe you're going to talk about the ultimate agenda of Sharia takeover and why Adhan is so important, as a lot of the Islamophobes were talking about all this time. They were talking about this being a stepping stone to achieving your ultimate Islamization of Canada agenda. That's, which is unfortunate. So thank you for putting that to.
If I may, in 2007, I was in Switzerland, and if you remember, there was a controversy of the Adhan and the minaret in Geneva, and there was it was a big debate, and I did a radio interview in French on this very issue, discussing this very issue. So history repeats itself. Europe has more opposition to Adhan than Canada, but wherever is in Europe is being imported. That's history is just repeating itself. I think we should look at what happened before us. 2007 was a big thing in Europe, starting from Geneva with the issue of the Adhan.
Good point. Very good point. Sister Rabia, there was an argument that was made that the Athan triggered PTSDs among some war veterans who served in the Middle East. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we had anybody who actually stepped forward and said that this was their experience, that it was actually a trigger. I think if someone stepped forward and said it was a trigger, I would acknowledge that. I would respect that. But essentially, Islamophobes again use that argument without any evidence.
Interesting. Well, you know, Sister Rabia, you said in an interview in the Vice article, how is prayer calling disrupting you? Church bells don't bother me, and I actually want to hear them ring. We can't keep talking about celebrating diversity without allowing people to actually celebrate. I thought that was very beautiful. My question to you, Sister Amira, and you have said something similar. I'm wondering, how do you expect people of other faiths to sort of celebrate with you in solidarity when it comes to Adhan?
You know, I think it's really just really important that we always sort of recognize the mosaic that is Canada, and first and foremost to acknowledge that these lands are Indigenous lands, that we, you know, I'm here in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin territory, that the original inhabitants of these lands are Indigenous communities who themselves were actually, after the establishment of Canada, were prevented from practicing their own religions through laws that were brought forth by the colonizers. So, you know, that's a very oppressive history that we already have. And I think there is widespread acknowledgement in the Canadian psyche that was wrong. And we have the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, and there's a lot of work to restore trust and relationships with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I think that work definitely needs to sort of permeate all of the relationships that we have with one another. And that includes minority communities that are either faith minority communities or ethnic, cultural, etc. That we, as the Multiculturalism Act states, you know, that we have that opportunity to celebrate and acknowledge who we are, and that is actually something that strengthens us as a country. This is, Canada is often, with all of its warts, is often still looked as, a strong experiment, a work in progress, but a strong experiment in promoting social cohesion with a strong immigration policies that bring people from around the world to contribute positively. And we know that, to ensure that people are able to contribute and are able to sort of, raise their own children in a society in which everyone has access to succeeding, that acknowledging people's differences, not trying to make them erase them, that by acknowledging those differences, celebrating, giving that space to one another, that we really get the best of each other, and that we really get our authentic selves, and it really impacts from, our young children all the way into adulthood. So I think there is a general consensus and understanding that it is very important that we celebrate one another and support one another. And I think the vast majority of Canadians, who represent different backgrounds themselves, like all of us are Canadian, we represent different backgrounds, but we do have shared values, and those shared values include human rights, equity, respect for one another, and I think that we must continue to hold on to those values and make sure that our elected officials really respect that as well.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. While majority of Canadians were supportive, and we know that, we witnessed a couple of groups of very loud voices that were opposed to this. And we know that there were 3 separate online petitions that were launched, one of which garnered over 20,000 signatures. And 2 of these petitions were actually taken down by change.org, given the amount of hate they were generating. There was a huge face group that was launched in a matter of few hours that had several hundred members. And we know that they were able to commit to raise over $120,000 for legal action against the city. for allowing this permission or giving this permission. My question is, this seems to be a very organized effort. As some of you have acknowledged, there are certain groups behind it. I'm wondering if Imam Salimi or Sister Rabia or Sister Amira, if you can shed some light on who are these people that we're talking about who are importing, as Faisal Kuti calls them, old home politicians of politics. And you were talking about importing. Amira is talking about importing, back home grudges, I guess. So who are these people we're talking about here?
Like I mentioned earlier, one positive thing which I see, the most positive thing for us, and you as believers, as followers of Islam, we understand that this world is made of positivities and negativities in life, and there are positive elements and negative elements. Everything has positive and negative. It's like electricity. And we know the way we believe, one of the pillars of faith, the 6 pillars, we believe in destiny. And what it teaches us, that in life we're going to have positive experiences and we will be grateful to Allah, and we will have negative experiences and we will be still grateful and patient, because that negative can turn positive. And the way we can see the positive in this is understanding, as we did in this controversy in Ramadan about the Athan, we know who our, I don't want to use the word enemies, but the people who are contending, the people who are opposing us. It's good to know the one who's against you. The worst thing is not to know who's against you and you take everybody as friends. Like it was expressed earlier, but by your esteemed guests, the majority in Canada are good. And then we notice that there are some elements not native, and I wouldn't say the word native in a sense as expressed earlier, the First Nations. No, not native meaning they're not, they're immigrants like many of us, or those communities, majority of them are communities, without naming all of them, but we know them specifically, around 3 communities. They seem to have a bitter experience due to historical events, God knows, and they have become, as we say in French, plus royaliste que le roi. They are more monarchist than the king himself. So they would take up such causes as if they are defending Christianity or Christendom or secular world. And you find them always leading that, and always exposing or trying in their mind, of course, to expose the Muslims, and the Muslims that you are giving freedoms, the Muslims that are benefiting from this system. We know them better than you. We lived with them. We know what they are up to. And they make up stories, and they are the ones who are fueling Islamophobia, both in the United States and Canada, and also in Europe, in the old country, in the old continent. And this is very, unfortunately, it's a growing movement. And if you look at the last municipal elections, both in Mississauga and Toronto, I don't know about Ottawa and other places, but we know who voted for those candidates who are leading these movements, and the number was so high. We're talking about 40-some thousands in Toronto, and it was around 20-something thousands in Mississauga. Compared to the elections before, there was an increase in some areas of 20 to 30%. That means it's a growing movement. God knows if the trend goes this same way, then the elections in next elections, municipal elections, you're going to see more of people joining that movement if we don't change our strategy, if we don't address these issues. I mean, you taking this topic today, it's actually a very good post-mortem session to analyze and think. It's a think tank. What can we do as a Muslim community? Of course, now we're talking in public, and we share ideas and listen to the people who are really watching, and also their feedback is very important. But we need to sit down in a private setting as Muslim leaders and think, how can we address these people? Why they carry such hate? Why they see us as a danger? I heard it, and I heard from the mouth of the lion, as they say, expressions like this: oh, we left our country because of these people. Now we're shocked that Toronto has more of them. You know, expressions like that. So this is the reality. This is the reality. But again, the elections, municipal elections, revealed to us that it is a growing movement, and we need to be very careful and not to be, too comfortable, because yes, maybe the people we vote for are winning, are leading, but the growing movement is there, and we have to be conscious of that.
Thank you. Amira, why don't you chime in at this point?
Yeah, I think I sort of want to echo what Imam Slimi's saying, and he's sort of, taking the spotlight a little bit further from those who are promoting that hate, and sort of thinking more about what we can do ourselves given this context and how we can sort of respond to it. And I really like that approach. As I mentioned before, if viewers do want to learn more about these particular groups, they should search at the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. We have an article by Stephen Zhao that looks at the details of one of these particular groups, and they can look for his article as well on Vice that gets more into detail. But I want to take the limited time that we have here to sort of flag that I think the success in the end of having municipal councils, just not ignore the haters. They had to listen to those voices, and they're residents as well, and they deserve that opportunity in a democracy to express their concerns. They whether we think they're legitimate concerns or that they're not so legitimate, that whether it's based on Islamophobia or about some misunderstanding about what democracy looks like, they had that opportunity to air their concerns, and good for them. But the key here, I think, was city councils, particularly, for instance, I know in Mississauga, have a strong relationship with the Muslim community there, thanks to people like Sister Rabia, like Imam Slimi, like many others, Muhammad Faqih, who's, mashallah, like a real institution in and of himself in that community, and many, many others. They know who we are. They know that, Mississauga Muslims, Ottawa Muslims, etc., are active in the community, that they care, that they are engaged in taking care of, food banks, supporting the elderly, particularly now in this pandemic. We've seen incredible efforts by different organizations and whatnot. So they know who we are. And I think if anything that we learn about this experience is two things. One is to continue being very engaged in our communities in every which way. And two, think about how do we participate in our political systems. We really do need to participate. It's not just about running for office. It's great to see the representation we have at the federal level. We need to increase that representation at provincial and municipal levels, but also in the, in the back rooms of politics, getting involved in, in whether it's provincial, federal, and also municipal politics is so important. The local often gets sort of overlooked at how important it is to be involved in municipal politics. And I know Sister Rabia will probably have a lot to say about that, because she herself has run for council, and she has been herself a pillar in the community. So the point here is that we have nothing to fear when we are engaged, because our actions will be a testament to what we stand for. And what we stand for is what every community, faith or otherwise, stands for. And that is inclusive, equitable, just, fair, safe, secure communities where everybody's taken care of. And that's what we are here to do. So as long as we make sure that we're out there and we demonstrate in our actions what we stand for, those people who try to say, well, this is a danger because A, B, C, D, they really won't have much credibility. And we've come a long way. Maybe over a decade ago, we weren't as involved. And so people didn't really know who we were as much. We've come a long way, and the generations coming up are engaged in so many beautiful ways. And I think that, again, we will be able to overcome those negative feelings so long as we are participating and we're showing up and we're, demonstrating what we stand for.
Excellent. Well, that sort of is a great segue into actually what I wanted to end our conversation today with, and that is really what are some of the lessons that we learned and that we can take away from this very tragic, incident and explosion of Islamophobic sentiments that we saw, and we saw some beautiful sentiments, some beautiful people who came out to support it, who actually appreciated Adhan, but also there are others who are, of course, unfortunately, a very small minority who actually used this as an opportunity to bash Islam and Muslim community. So, Sister Rabia, would you like to share any thoughts on, based off of sort of what Sister Amira just shared with us, and Imam Hamid Salimi?
Sure, absolutely. Amira, sort of summed up really nicely
Yes.
what we want to, what we all strive for, what we have in common, regardless of our faith or culture or whatever background we possess, newcomers, oldcomers, whatever. That we have certain common values as Canadians that we share, that we want in order to ensure a decent quality of life for us and our children and our neighbors and our communities. So given that reality, I think it's really important that we continue investing in building relationships within our neighborhoods, within our workplaces, building those political relationships, being engaged, as Amira said, in various ways. We don't have to have our name on the ballot, but we have to be involved. We have to be working behind the scenes. A lot of power rests behind the scenes and not always in front of the camera. So that's also really, really important for us to continue keeping in mind, that investing in interfaith relationships is really important. We as Muslims have to stand firm and proud. We can't just be seeking accommodation for ourselves, but accommodation is a two-way street. Human rights are given and taken. We cannot be the obstacle in the way of other equity-seeking groups and then expect everyone to embrace the accommodations or human rights that we wish to champion and enjoy for ourselves. So, the tradition, the prophetic saying, which I will completely butcher, and absolute apologies for that, I must love for my brother or sister in humanity what I love for myself. I think we have to live by that golden rule of Islam. In Christianity, do unto others as you wish others to do unto you. We have to embrace that genuinely in our hearts, and we have to be the pillars of championing justice and equity and fairness and safety and security of every human being, even where those lines are blurred and conflicting for us spiritually. At the end of the day, we have to be the ones who are uplifting people and combating oppression, not being silent, standing by, or waving a flag in front. But we have to really look within ourselves for that. We have to invest in relationships, as I said. We know who our friends are. We know who are working against us. And we have to realize that as a community, we need to invest in ourselves to work collectively. If we do not work collectively, if we do not sit at the table and plan a strategy and work on that strategy with genuine interest to improve the well-being of this society, to keep it healthy and whole, to keep the Canada we love going forward, we have to have a strategy to do that. Otherwise, our rights will be eroded, and so will the rights of others around us.
I think that's a beautiful note to end our conversation on. I wish we could talk more. There's a lot more that could have been said. So on this positive note, I would like to thank our really amazing presenters tonight, Imam Hamid Salimi, Sister Amira Al-Ghawabi, Sister Rabia Khidr. All of them are pioneers and leaders on so many fronts in our community, doing amazing work. And you just heard from them, what Adhan meant to them, and why it was a big deal or not a big deal, and the beauty that brought out that came out of this incident that we all witnessed over the last 1 month, and how we can, inshallah, God willing, combat voices of hate and drown out voices of hate with the positive work that we do, not just for ourselves, for everybody. So on that note, I would like to thank everybody for tuning in. on Canada Today show on Muslim Network TV. I want to also thank Dawanet for their marketing partnership, as well as our producer today, Nergis Naqvi. Thank you very much. And once again, this is Taha Bayur, your host. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.